Now, you've seen with your own eyes, you've seen what the relationship is between sound and form. And the reason I wanted you to see that before we go forward with this, I know that you know that vibration affects your world. What you may not have considered is that emotion is a vibration. Feelings are vibrations. When you emote and when you feel, what you are doing is generating a pattern within the liquid crystal structure of your body that you call muscle and tissue. Your emotions and your feelings are holding these patterns in place. Now, what's happening in your lives is that Earth is going through a vibratory shift. The liquid crystal of your body is attempting to accommodate that shift. And to the degree that emotion is allowed within your body, to the degree that you allow your emotions to allow the patterns to unfold within your body, to that degree do you experience a graceful transition. And here's how it happens. This is exactly the way this process works. This is not a metaphor. I'm going to describe to you now something the ancients called the sacred circuit. In our tradition, when I was in school, when you were in school, you were taught that our cells, the cells and the DNA in our body, are regulated by the brain. That the brain regulates the immune system of our body and all of our regulatory functions, the heating and cooling of the body, our metabolism, aging and deterioration. I make a distinction between aging and deterioration. You will all be 4 hours older. This is a 4-hour video. 4 hours older after you've seen this video, and you don't care about that. Did you deteriorate in those 4 hours? That's what you care about. And if you did, why? Do we have to deteriorate? All of our responses to the external environment, we're conditioned that our brain regulates all of those. Now, I won't say that that's not true. What I'll say is that that is incomplete, because the brain responds to a pulse, an electromagnetic signal, and that is how it regulates these cells. Where does that signal come from? Well, researchers asked the same question, and about 2 years ago, 1994, 93, 94, what researchers discovered was that the brain does in fact have a signal, and it responds and directs the signal, receives a signal directly from the human heart. That there is actually a circuit, a resonant tuning between the human heart and the brain and the cells of our body. And it didn't take researchers long to say, well, if that's true, where does the heart get its signal? And this isn't the heartbeat. We're not talking about the heartbeat. We're talking about the electromagnetic pulse of the heart that you would get in an EKG, for example. Well, it didn't take researchers long to discover that the Earth is, in fact, tuned to something else. The Earth receives its signals from something else directly from the Earth. So what we can say is that there is a circuit that moves from the Earth to the heart, to the brain, to the cells of our body, a tuned resonant circuit. It's not about wires connecting things together. It's a vibratory tuning. And this system that we have is a system that is ongoing. Anytime there's a change anywhere in this system, everything from that point down must change. So look at what's happening right now. We just defined the changes that the Earth is going through. Magnetic changes, frequency changes. Everything down in the system must respond and accommodate that change. Your heart must accommodate that change to successfully transition. So what we say is that the Earth entrains the heart, and the heart entrains the brain, and the brain entrains the cells. This is the sacred circuit. So another view of the circuit looks like this, because the circuit goes on from our Earth. Here's the cells of your body. There's your brain, your heart. Your heart is tuned to the Earth. Well, where does the Earth get its signals? From our nearest star, our sun. Remember in the very beginning of our talk, we said that our sun is going through a tremendous transition right now. It's losing magnetics, going to steady state magnetics. Well, if Earth is tuned to our sun, I would expect that Earth would follow suit. And what are researchers telling us about Earth? Earth is indeed losing the magnetics. Our star is tuned to something, whatever that energy source is, at the center of our Milky Way. The very first slide, second slide, we saw that at that center, the great central sun, as the ancients called it, the center of the Milky Way, that signal changed in 1991. We began to pick up a new signal that is cascading down through this resonant circuit. So from this very simple diagram, from this conceptual model, you can see that truly the cells of your body, you are truly part of all that you see, resonantly tuned to your world. And you ask yourself, if we have this resonance, if we are always tuned to our world, then why aren't we always tuned to our world? Why aren't we always tuned to the earth as the earth goes through the shifts that earth is going through? And it's a very good question, and it's the crux of where we go from this point forward, because you and I have the luxury, we have the opportunity of emotion in our lives, and different components of emotion either enable or disable or impede the body's ability to maintain its tuning to the earth. Fear. Fear is a powerful ally in the experience of human expression. Fear is also a very powerful discordant frequency that disallows the tuning of the human body to the earth. And fear in our culture, fear has many masks. Now here is our tuned resonance circuit again. Here's the cells, the brain, the heart, the earth. Traditionally, now admittedly this is changing right now within the last few years. Traditionally this is what we've done. Between our heart and our brain, we have cut ourselves off. We've separated mind knowing from heart knowing in our world. And the ancients have told us, the indigenous peoples have said for years, love your earth, love your home. That's the key to harmony in your world. To a 20th century male-oriented, schematically diagrammed Western technological society, that doesn't mean much when you say love your earth. Now, as we're able to establish this resonant relationship, we know what that's saying. And the same thing happens between the heart and the brain. Historically, we have cut ourselves off from our planet and from our brain simply through our life patterns and choices of lifestyle and the way that we've chosen to live. And that is changing now as we remember, as we heal this circuit, we heal the process. Fear is the only pattern that I'm aware of, the interference pattern that prevents whole earth, heart, brain, cell resonance. And in our culture, fear has many masks. Now, I placed this image here, not knowing how it would come out across the video. We'll try this and we'll see. This is an experiment that was done at Bell Labs in New Jersey, and it's kind of interesting. Down below, what you see are 200 blocks. It's a combination of 200 blocks of black, white, and gray that are randomly organized, and that's what that is. Up above, when I ask people what they are seeing in this arrangement, this array of these same 200 blocks, just arranged differently, more often than not, what they'll say is a man, and then they are even specific enough to say Abraham Lincoln in some cases. Well, this isn't Abraham Lincoln at all. And if I take this image, I've done this, taken it to a country where men do not grow facial hair and where they've never heard of Abraham Lincoln, they won't see a man here at all. We see it in this country. And the reason that we see that is the reason that I'm showing it to you here. Because your brain attempts to make sense out of all the information that comes to it. And when it finds something it cannot recognize, it finds the next best pattern, the closest thing that it knows, to assign meaning to that pattern. So this is an example of how we do this with our brain and with our eyes. You and I do precisely the same thing through emotion and feeling. We generalize patterns of feeling. Fear has many, many masks in our society. It's not always Stephen King, pure, unadulterated, shake in your boots fear. If you are able to use any or any combination of these terms to describe some relationship in your life, anger, jealousy, egos, aggressiveness, control, overprotective, smothering, trust issues, depression, emotional unavailability, physical unavailability, prejudiceness, unhappiness, judgment. If you're able to use any or some combination of those words, what you're describing to yourself in the honesty of that description is that you are experiencing fear in that relationship. And it's not bad. I'll be very clear. It is not bad to experience fear. What we are choosing to do is redefine the patterns of fear in our lives so that they may become our friends and our tremendous allies, indicating to us the portions of ourselves, of this liquid crystal matrix that have not found balance in our world as we're barreling down this road toward what the ancients called the shift of the ages. It is through the gift of fear and the redefinition of that fear that we know ourselves, and that we know ourselves in all ways. Fear, as it expresses many ways in our lives, what I can say to you is this, that for most of you, for most people, 90% of the fears that you will experience in your world are not even your fears. You'll go through 3/4, maybe a full lifetime, coming to terms and recognizing that those patterns are not yours. You may lose entire relationships. You may lose careers in the process of the remembering. The fears are not yours. You were born plugged into predetermined patterns of fear. And I'm going to show you that. I'll show you genetically precisely how it happens in this lifetime, in this last lifetime of maturity before the shift of the ages. What you're being asked to do is to unplug from those old patterns, to break the cycle, to create the paradigm where those fears do not mean the same thing to you any longer. That is your gift of the living bridge to those that you hold most dear in your life. It's done through these codes, the patterns of genetics and DNA within your bodies. Now, when you look at life, this is a standard definition, our standard definition of life. It's interesting. This came up from a chemical textbook. Life is a behavior pattern that chemical systems exhibit when they reach a certain level of complexity. That definition is what was behind our mission to Mars in 1976, as we were looking for biological life. What I really believe we were looking for was consciousness and not life, necessarily. In this narrow definition, we sent this spindly-looking little craft to the surface of Mars, and the rickety thing sort of settled in a cloud of dust on the surface of the planet. It was built by a company that I proudly say I used to work for, Martin Marietta Aerospace. They build very good interplanetary probes. And I always have this image when I think about the Viking mission, looking for life on Mars. If I were sitting there, seeing this cloud of dust and this rickety thing coming down, looked like a big spider, onto the surface, and all the dust settles out, and all of a sudden a little tube pops up, and from that tube, a little arm comes up and directs itself into a certain position, and it's silent, and all of a sudden there's a pop, and this thing that looks like dental floss with a weight on the end of it shoots across the Martian surface, and then they reel it back in, and the sticky stuff on the string is holding the microbes as the string is drawn down through a media. And the idea was that if there was life on Mars that would show up as a culture in this media, it would send that information back to Earth, and we would say, there's life on another planet, not knowing that within a few miles of where they were looking for biological life, there were archaeological remnants between 50 and 100,000 years old, reaching 2 miles long and resembling very closely many of the archaeological sites here on Earth. Well, this was our definition of life, and we didn't find any life on Mars biologically, so we say there is no life there. Well, when we define that life, what we say is it takes 6 components: water, fats, lipids, proteins, salts, carbohydrates, and nucleic acids to create the life as we know life on Earth. And it's the nucleic acids that we'll focus on. DNA, everyone knows about DNA now because of the O.J. Simpson trial. If nothing else, everybody knows what DNA is all about. What we can say essentially is that DNA makes RNA, RNA makes proteins, and proteins allow the amino acids in our bodies to be what they are. And that all sounds very technical, and what I'll say is you do not have to know any of that. I'm going to offer this from a very different perspective. Now think about this. The reason I put this slide here is so that you can see each of these amino acids, this one here, this one here, this one here. As the amino acids are different, they have a different form, a different geometry, a different shape. I think you can see that. And this is a close-up of more of those amino acids. Notice how this is alanine, for example. It looks like a lollipop. And here we have aspartic acid. Looks like a Y with an extension on the bottom of it. Each of these amino acids has a very specific form. It's a pattern. It's a shape. And what I'll ask you to do is to simply consider these as microantennae, microchakras. because that is from a metaphoric perspective, that's precisely the role that they play. Micro antennas, micro chakras. Now we have codes for these antennas, and our codes are 3-digit codes: UCU, GAU. These are chemical codes that we use to define different combinations of carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen that go into making these antennae. So what I have on this list right here, these are the 20 known amino acids, the 20 known antennae that define human as you and I know human today. Some of these you've probably heard about, the lysine and the tryptophan that has been very controversial on the markets today. So you may think of these as the 20 antennae that we have available to us right now. So the 64 possibilities of codes that we call the human genetic code are what you're seeing here. And there's a mystery surrounding these codes. And this is a mystery that has been with us, the life sciences, even to this moment. Even to this moment. And the mystery looks like this. We have 64 possibilities. 64 possibilities. And of these 64 possibilities, it appears that only 20 of these codes are turned on right now for us, the 20 amino acids. So I'm going to go over to the board and let's look at this and see what this means to us. 64 possibilities of code that we have available to us. Why aren't all 64 possibilities turned on? We have 20 amino acids. If these are antennae, we have 64 possibilities of antenna. If only 20 antennae are turned on, where are the rest of them? Where are the rest of the antennae? Why don't we have the other 44 antennae turned on for us? That's the mystery in the life sciences. That continues to be a mystery in this moment. Well, let's look into this a little deeper, and I'd like to share some new research with you that's coming out. With just the last few months, researchers are lending us new clues and new evidence into what this information means. For example, I've put a box around the amino acid of leucine. So leucine is defined as UUA. That's a leucine, and that's fine. But look at this. UUG is a completely different chemical combination, and it's still leucine. And CUU is still leucine. CUC, CUA, CUG. Why is it that all of these don't result in separate, individual, and different patterns? Why do they all code for exactly the same amino acid of leucine? Why are they so generalized? That's the mystery in the life sciences today. Well, researchers have been able to show us, and this is a pretty amazing thing to say. The mystery has always been, when we look at genetic codes, when we see those amino acids lined up on the double helix, what is it that determines whether the amino acids, whether the antennae are turned off or on? Well, within just recent years, through the HeartMath Institute, people like Dan Winter working with HeartMath, what has been discovered is this, is that there is a switch that turns off and turns on where those coding sites lie, and that the switch for that turning off and turning on is what we call emotion. And this is the first time that we've ever seen the patterns of emotion directly physically linked to human genetic material. So what I'm saying is this. When you look at the double helix, the green is the double helix of the DNA on this image. What Dan Winter says is that the long wave of emotion programs this shorter wave of DNA. So emotion, the long wave, the long red wave of emotion, wherever this wave of emotion touches, where it crosses this double helix, is what determines where the site is that code will either be turned off or turned on. If we're going to have an antenna at this site, it will only be turned on if the wave of emotion crosses this, this double helix. Well, this is really interesting for us because two things. First of all, the waves of emotion, researchers have determined that you and I are primarily capable of only two emotions. Many derivatives of those emotions, and two primary emotions, fear and love. Fear and love. Well, fear is a long, slow wave of emotion. So this wave of fear is a long, slow wave and touches relatively few sites on this DNA. So an individual living in fear is limited to the number of antennae that they have available to them, whereas an individual living in the pattern of love, this is love in DNA. You can see it's a higher frequency, shorter wavelength. We have many more potential sites for coding along that genetic pattern. This information, this is amazing. This is the first time we've ever had a hard digital link between emotion and genetics. And what we're saying is this, that the way you interpret and perceive emotion in your lives directly, linearly affects and determines how your body responds genetically. In compassion, in love, you have the opportunity, and it is an opportunity, to encode many more genetic patterns within your body. When you live in fear, when you live in depression, it's not wrong and it's not bad. Please do not hear that. What fear and depression allow you to do is to have the opportunity of the consequence of fewer numbers of those codes that are turned on, and they're changeable. You have the opportunity through your life to determine which of these codes you're actually using. This pattern, this particular image, this is some research that was done through the HeartMath Institute, and a brilliant work by a gentleman named Vladimir Popanov, a Russian researcher. And what he determined was this. They took human DNA tissue, placed it into a vacuum tube, and measured the photons in that tube. Well, actually, they measured the photons just before the tissue went into that tube. And what they found was that the photons were scattered. Let me show you this on a drawing. What they found was that the photons were scattered in this vacuum tube. So here's the tube. Here are random photons. And they said, okay, that's fine. That's what we would expect. Into this vacuum tube now, they placed human DNA, human tissue. I'm not sure where the tissue came from or what it was. So let's put a little double helix in there. And then they measured the photons again, and what they found astounded the researchers. It astounds me to this day. What they found was that the patterns of light align themselves. Let's make light red. The patterns of light align themselves along the axis of the DNA. That's what I'm showing here. That's what I'm showing right here on this slide. The patterns of light align themselves along the axis of this DNA. What they can say is, what we can say from this, is that DNA entrains light. Now, the really interesting thing was when they took the DNA out of the vacuum, the light was still entrained in that pattern, even though the DNA wasn't there. And the researchers call this now the phantom DNA effect. And what they are saying, what we can say very accurately, is that light responds to our genetic material. And in that, with that piece of information now, for the first time, what we have is a link between emotion, DNA, and light, which is what our world is made out of. As emotion, thoughts, love, fear, whatever they are, as emotion determines the patterns and the codes in the DNA, and the DNA determines the patterns of light. DNA serves as a template for the patterns of light around us. For the first time, we have hard, physical, direct evidence, digital evidence, that our emotions and our thoughts directly affect the physical world around us. And that is an amazing thing for me to be able to say to you. Not only does it affect the world around us, it affects the world within us. The energetic systems of the body, the nervous systems, the nervous pathways, and the chakras are all determined through our experience of emotion and feeling, how emotion and feeling trip the switches of genetic material and our body resulting as an expression of that. Okay, so let's review a little bit. Let's see what we've got here. We've just covered a lot of ground in a short period of time. What you're seeing here, this is an image, a schematic, of an electromagnetic experience. The blue that you're seeing here, this is the electrical portion. This is thought and emotion. and offset by 90 degrees from this thought, trailing behind. If this were three-dimensional, this would be coming out toward you and going back into the screen. The red are the magnetic fields that we are accustomed to in our world. So historically, whenever we've had a thought or a feeling or an emotion, the lag time between the time that that thought is generated and when it comes to fruition is the result of these dense magnetic fields. Think of the magnetic fields as the glue, as the muck, sticky stuff that prevents these thoughts from manifesting instantly. When you have a fantasy, why doesn't your fantasy come true immediately? And think how confusing your world would be if it did. Well, it's because these magnetic fields prevent that from happening. Well, look what's happening in our world right now. You and I are living a time of decreased magnetics, many fewer magnetics. There's no glue, there's no muck, no sticky stuff left to prevent these thoughts from manifesting quickly. What's actually happening, and this is the beauty of this process, when you go to the sacred sites throughout the world, many sacred sites, what we're seeing, now we're able to bring much of this information all together now and synthesize this into the patterns that are allowing our life to unfold as they're unfolding. What we're seeing is this, that in many of the sacred sites throughout the world, the chambers that were the sacred sites, those chambers built 1,000 years ago, maybe in Chaco Canyon, 5,000 years ago, some cases 11 and 13,000 years ago, those chambers simulated then what you and I are living right now. You go to the board and show you this. Many of those chambers simulated low magnetics then. They simulated high frequency then. Every once in a while, we'll find a sacred site in a chamber that simulates both of them together. Now think about this. Think about what this means. It means thousands of years ago, the ancients knew of this time in history. They knew that you would be living this time in history. They built chambers then to simulate and to model what you are living now in your living room. You don't have to go to a sacred site to find and to have this experience. They immersed themselves into those chambers and they recorded what the experience meant to them. They passed it down to you through what became ancient, sacred, and in some cases religious texts, providing essentially a roadmap of what a human may be expected to do to move gracefully through this time in history. Well, let's look at some of these sacred sites. Machu Picchu in Peru, beautiful, beautiful examples of the chambers. Many of the caves and the temples in the Tibetan highlands, we find examples of these same chambers. And you do not even have to go outside of our country, right in our own backyard. Chaco Canyon, New Mexico. Beautiful, beautiful temples. Anywhere else in the world you go and see archaeological sites on this massive of a scale, they're called temple complexes. In North America, they're called Indian ruins for some odd reason. Well, in this particular temple complex, this is one of over 2,800 archaeological sites in Chaco Canyon. This is one of only 12 that have been excavated and restored. 900 rooms in this site alone, and the rooms are all situated around circular stone chambers built into the ground called kivas. There are 36 of them. You can see some of them right here. Not far from this site, right across the canyon, is one large kiva. This is over 90 feet in diameter, Casa Rinconada. These chambers, these tuned resonant chambers, simulate either low magnetics or high frequency or both, so that the initiate may know themselves then in these chambers and know what the body response to these experiences are. Then you and I no longer need these temples. We no longer need these sites. This is a beautiful image of a restoration from inside of a kiva in northern, by Aztec, New Mexico, northern New Mexico. Look how Egyptian this looks. Whenever I see these images, I always think of an Egyptian influence here. This is a restoration of what these used to look like 900 and 1,000 years ago is approximately where these are dating to. These chambers in sacred sites. Well, possibly the best known of these chambers in sacred sites is a particular chamber in the Great Pyramid of Giza. And when you look at these images, I put this in here intentionally, many people believe that this is the Great Pyramid because it appears to be the tallest. Some of the books on the Great Pyramid actually show this on the cover. This is not the Great Pyramid. The Great Pyramid is the one with the flat top in the back. Where we're sitting, it appears to be smaller. It's actually much larger than this one. And it's within this chamber of the Great Pyramid, in a very special chamber, the King's Chamber, the Chamber of Light, as it's called in the ancient texts, in a very special passageway leading up to that chamber, and in a very special box within that chamber called the sarcophagus. This is an image of the sarcophagus that was taken at night. It's illuminated from within. That many initiates in the mystery schools in our past simulated and modeled for themselves precisely what you and I are living in this moment right now. This is another image of this beautiful granite sarcophagus. The Tibetan records say that the man we know as Jesus of Nazareth completed his initiations in this chamber. If you have the opportunity to go and lie in this granite sarcophagus, there's a very good chance that you are lying precisely in the same place where Christ was just about 2,000 years ago, and many other initiates. Recent records are showing that Moses also had the opportunity to experience and to complete his initiation in this chamber before he led his people out of Egypt. So this is the granite sarcophagus. This chamber simulated then what you and I are living now, so that our experience would be, the roadmap, the path to our experience would be laid out for us if we had the wisdom to recognize it. And I believe that's what we're experiencing right now. Now let's go into some other chambers. In Egypt, for example, traditional Egyptian history says that the temples of Egypt were built to worship gods. I just returned from Egypt a few weeks ago, and many of the tour guides are still saying that. They're saying that they were built to worship the gods of light, the gods of dark, the gods of war. Well, you know, the only people that really say that are the tour guides and some of the history books, because the Egyptians themselves in the temple walls and the mystery schools give us a much different story. And what they say is this. I'm going to use this particular temple to begin an example. This is the temple of Karnak. Just outside of the Karnak complex, there is a small temple that's generally closed to the public, dedicated to the body of a woman and the head of a lioness, whose name is Sekhmet. Sekhmet, S-E-K-M-E-T. Now, traditional Egyptian history says that Sekhmet was the goddess of war. And wherever you would see the goddess of war, Sekhmet, you would see individuals praying for a good war, or praying not to have war, or something surrounding the act of war. What the mystery schools say, and what the temple walls themselves say, is that this wasn't a temple built to worship anyone, that these chambers were built and dedicated to some aspect. They isolated some aspect of the human psyche, some aspect of the human personality, and the initiates had the opportunity to immerse themselves in this temple for some period of time to master that aspect of their lives. So, for example, Sekhmet, not the goddess of war, Sekhmet was dedicated to the warrior that lives within every human who has ever lived. The warrior within you. You know that warrior very well. You know how to use that warrior. Do you know when that warrior is appropriate? Your relationships will teach you the mastery as you have the wisdom to allow and recognize that appropriateness. The warrior within, the temple of Sekhmet. The temple of Isis in the island of Philae. This is a beautiful temple dedicated to two different aspects within the individual. The aspect of fidelity, which has many different meanings in many cultures. Fidelity to oneself, fidelity to the truth of one's path in life. That was one aspect of the temple of Isis, and the love that comes from that fidelity. Conjugal fidelity, the fidelity to commitments made to another in conjugal agreements. Beautiful temple complex, very well restored. We just recently returned from this particular temple. The temples of Hathor. This is interesting. I'm going to spend just a few minutes on this. Throughout Egypt, until recently, whenever you would see Hathor represented on a temple, you would see it like this. The face would be smoothed off and erased and taken away. When the Coptic Christians came through this part of the world centuries ago, they didn't like what Hathor was representing in their belief system. They chose not to destroy the temples, simply to wipe the faces away. And you'll see this throughout Egypt. You can see the faces are simply chiseled off of the temple walls and the columns. Well, until recently, we really didn't know what this Hathor looked like because all the temples had been defaced. 1986, 87, I was in Egypt and happened to be there during a time when they were excavating, the authorities were excavating to build a military bunker. And as happens so often, they dug into the ground to build this bunker, and they found a temple complex that had been lost in the history and the memory of the Nile floods that covered it in mud every year. And it was a small temple, a small chapel dedicated to Hathor. And it was the first time we ever really had a good view of what Hathor looked like. So I'd like to share that with you. This is our Egyptian guard that is letting us pass through this highly technical and very secured area, this fence right here, down into the enclosure. I'll orient you. This is ground level right here. So we're down ground level. And what you're seeing, these are the tops of the columns of the Hathor temple, and the floor is still 30 feet below the ground level. So they haven't excavated down. We're standing at the tops of the columns. And I just returned a few weeks ago from this very site, and they have not done any more excavation. They are not in any big hurry to excavate this site. So this is what Hathor looks like. Notice the beautifully delicate features of the lips, the eyes, the ears. Absolutely beautiful image. Hathor represented love, the love of oneself, the joy in the love of life. The reason I place these images here for you now is because it's interesting, no matter what temple you go to in Egypt, whether it's the temple of rage, the temple of the warrior within, the temple of light, the temple of darkness, the temples of lust, great temple to be stuck in for 30 years or so. Whatever temple you go into, you will find the image of Hathor, the image of love, outside of those temples, because it is in love that we are asked to know ourselves in rage. In love, we are asked to know the hate within in the past. We are asked to know of the light and the dark, and the jealousy and the lust. In love, we are asking ourselves to have the experience of life. And the Hathor, the energy, the patterns of Hathor at each of those temples to remind us of that. The temples of experience. The initiates thousands of years ago had the luxury of going into a temple and isolating some aspect of their experience and staying in that temple until they had mastered that emotion, staying in that temple for days or weeks or perhaps an entire lifetime. Maybe they were stuck in a particular temple, the temple of love, in the temple of what love and relationships are all about. As they progressed and moved forward through these temples, they would move on to the temples of knowledge and the temples of wisdom prior to their final initiations. Now, the reason I'm saying this to you now is because you and I no longer have the luxury of moving into a temple and isolating some aspect of emotion for years or for a lifetime. We live those temples every day in our lives through our relationships. Relationships are the temples that are allowing us to know ourselves in all ways, to know of the warrior within, to know of our anger and our rage and our joy and our ecstasy. The temples do not have to be painful. And as we redefine pain and fear in our lives, what we find is they are all opportunities. They are opportunities to know ourselves. The temples of knowledge. This is one of the most amazing temples in the Abydos temple complex. The temple of Seti I, just behind and below this temple now is we're seeing a site that is now being dated at over 22,000 years old. They're dating this, it's empirical evidence, from the layers of Nile flooding, the times that the river has flooded and receded. they've counted at least 22,000 layers covering this temple site. Well, this particular temple, probably one of the oldest in Egypt, is also one of the most amazing. When I was there in 1986, where you see this grass growing, this is a marsh in a swampy area. And what they did was they put this rickety little bridge down here for us so that we could walk across the water and examine the inside of these solid granite walls. And I'm going to go back a slide and point something out to you. Look at how these walls are constructed. Look at this tongue and groove construction of these massive granite blocks weighing 60 and 80 tons apiece. This is unique architecture, not to Egypt alone. We don't see this anywhere else in the world in modern times. And we know that these now, or we're suspecting these are at least 22,000 years old. Well, as we go down into these temple walls, we find even more of a mystery, perhaps. As you begin to see very specific patterns, geometric patterns, very non-Egyptian, upon these walls, the mystery itself comes from how these were even produced. Not painted, they're not etched, they are literally flash burned with a rapid, intense heat onto solid granite, high quartz walls thousands of years ago. The only technology we have today that would even approach that would be a laser, and a laser probably would not do it because a laser would be so hot, that it would melt the quartz crystals in the granite. And this quartz isn't melted, it's simply scorched. So there's a mystery as to how this pattern has even come about. Well, this pattern of 19 interlocking circles in the science of sacred geometry is now known as the flower of life. It is referenced in the emerald tablets of Thoth that we spoke of earlier, in the texts that were over 13,000 years old. So it wouldn't surprise me if this temple may be over 22,000 years old. Historians don't like those numbers. Geologists have no problem with those numbers at all. So it's interesting to see how these the dating methods and how the history and the sequence is unfolding. Well, this particular pattern is literally a two-dimensional informational system that was left to us through the temples of wisdom. And what may be said about this particular temple is that all that may be known, not experienced, not felt, not emoted, all that may be known in terms of our mathematical world is embodied within the geometric patterns that we see here. In case you couldn't see that well, I put this schematic here for you. What you're seeing are a series of curves, interlocking curves, like the CBS eye, looking like this. Those interlocking curves in the science of sacred geometry represent what is called the vesica Piscis. And what we're saying about the vesica Piscis is that each of those curves represents a male and a female energy in the old terms. In the new terms, we call this electrical and magnetic information in the 20th century idiom. It's the science of the union of opposites. And in the science of sacred geometry, what we say in the flower of life, it was within the inner and the outer walls, these two concentric circles of this pattern. These two concentric circles represent, metaphorically, the inner and the outer wall of the female egg, the female ovum. And what we say is that within those two circles represent all possibilities as potential. Anything can happen through the union of opposites and the way that those unions are allowed, electrical and magnetic energy. This is the temple of wisdom, one of the temples of wisdom that we have in Egypt. As the initiates would move through their lives mastering emotion, the temples of knowledge then would be meaningful to them, just like it is in our lives today. Without the context, without knowing what our lives mean to us, the knowledge is meaningless to us. We would move from the temples of emotion and the temples of knowledge then to the temples of wisdom. This image that you're seeing, the temple of the Sphinx, the temple of the wisdom. This is where the ancient texts tell us that the Hall of Records is actually maintained. The records of human history that resulted from the living of the knowledge, from the wisdom of the knowledge of our cycle from this time back to the last shift of the ages. This is the temple that Edgar Cayce references time and time again It's interesting, again, I was just in Egypt within the last few weeks. 3 doorways now, 3 passageways have been found that lead into hallways, stairways, and sealed stone and wooden doors that, leading to some chamber inside of this temple, probably in 1996, as they're estimating now that these doorways will be open. So it'll be interesting to see how that comes about. So the temples of wisdom. You and I live these temples. We're living the identical process to the initiates of old in our lives today. You and I do not have the luxury of going to a temple to isolate, going to a stone building to isolate these aspects of our lives. Our temples have, in fact, become our temples of relationship. This is the way the wisdom comes to us. Now, I've given you a schematic here as an illustration of the way the processes are coming to us. To the degree that you and I view the events in our lives purely through the logic of the mind, through the left and the right brain, the polarity of the mind, you and I always will live in that polarity. That's what locks us into the polarity. That's what locks us into the separation. And there's nothing wrong with that, so please not hear me say that it is wrong. It is a choice to remain locked into that polarity. And the ancients tell us that logic is very important. The logical mind is a key portion, plays a key role in our experience. And they also say that it goes even farther than that. What they say is that in addition to the logic of the mind, that it is the wisdom of the heart that tempers the logic of the mind. These concentric circles centering around the heart, the 7-layer liquid crystal oscillator that we call the heart. It's also interesting that in our language we have no word to describe a wisdom that comes from the heart. I have to go to another culture. Part of my heritage is Cherokee. And in the Cherokee traditions, there is a word that describes the single eye of the heart, the eye that sees no right, no wrong, no good, no bad. It simply sees an event for what it is and says, this is what it is, and these are the consequences of this event. The word for that is Shante Ishta, the single eye of the heart. What you and I are asking ourselves to do in this lifetime, through the temples of our emotions, through the temples of our relationships, is to find that balance between the logical mind and the wisdom of the heart and live that balance day in and day out. That becomes the compassion that we choose to have in our lives. This beautiful image I'm showing to you now because in a very real sense, what I'll say to you is that you do not need to go to a temple anywhere on this earth to have these experiences. It's fun to do that. You may do that, and you may have some very powerful experiences. Those temples may be catalysts for memory within your body. That certainly is true, and it's not necessary. Because for me, the greatest temple and the greatest mystery school of all is this temple right here. It's the temple of your soul. It's a temple that has brought you into the room that is allowing you to view, you and I, to view this video as we're seeing it right now. And it is in this temple that you will know of yourselves in all ways, and in that knowing, find the mastery that leads you gracefully into the transition, the phase change that the ancients called the shift of the ages. That is the message, I believe, of this and other reference beings. This man lived that science. He lived the science of compassion. He anchored it among us. I was taught when I was young that the gift of this man was in his death, that he died for my sins that I had not even yet committed in my life. And it made about this much sense to me. So I was asking myself to explore further. And what we now know is that this man's gift was not in his death, first of all, because he never died. If he had died, the message would have been lost. This man resurrected. And resurrection is much different than death. And it was in the resurrection and in the gift of his life, anchoring the message, walking among humans, living the message day in and day out, living compassion, that he became the living bridge. If one person saw the demonstration of his life, then it was anchored in this world and it became a memory. And that memory, that electromagnetic pulse, just like you saw in the cymatics images, that memory is the memory that he is the living bridge left for you and I. And he became that bridge. You in your lifetime, now you are being asked to become that living bridge for yourself and for those that you hold most dear in the living day in and day out of whatever your life means to you through the science of compassion. Becoming a compassionate and forgiving being. And there is a science to that. It's not a random nebulous concept. There are very real parameters that define for us what compassion is all about. We've covered a tremendous amount of information in a relatively brief period of time. And I'd like to take just a moment to summarize, bring some of these concepts into perspective, into focus, and then spend the next few minutes moving from there with personal experiences, describing, making concrete some of the points that may appear to be a little bit nebulous at this time. So I'd like to step over to our board and go through briefly what we began speaking about earlier in this day. Everyone feels that something's happening in their lives. Now for the first time, our scientists are able to digitally quantify what that something is. The Earth is in fact experiencing a drop in magnetics, an increase in frequency, and they appear to be moving toward a point where they will culminate in what the ancients called the shift of the ages. Through the sacred circuit, you saw the images of the sacred circuit, how every cell in our body is tuned to the brain, which is trained to the heart and tuned to the earth. Our body is attempting to match these changes that the earth is going through. Our body is trying to maintain a tuning, a resonance to these changes. As earth vibrates in an increased fashion and experiences lower and lower magnetics. The only way that our bodies are able to maintain this tuning is through the allowing of our emotions. If you and I were rocks, if we were sitting out on the sidewalk as a pile of concrete, we would always be in tune with the earth, and we would not have the opportunity to feel and emote. And it is through the gift of emotion, the gift of feeling, that we are able to create interference patterns that we call fear, impeding our ability to allow this tuning process. So what is happening is you and I are barreling down this road toward the time the ancients called the shift of the ages. Our bodies are attempting to match this tuning within the earth, and the only mechanism that we have that allows that process is our ability to emote and to feel. And you don't have to know any of that. That is the context within which this whole process is unfolding. Now, the way it comes about is that you and I skillfully and masterfully in our lives have learned to create relationships, interpersonal relationships with other people. Not all romantic, although romantic relationships sometimes are the most intense and the fastest learning mechanisms that we have. Any relationship, any interpersonal action that you have with another human is a relationship that I'm referencing now. It could be a 2-minute relationship with a checkout person at a Safeway, or a 30-year relationship with a spouse who you've known and loved dearly. It can be an interpersonal relationship with a coworker, with a supervisor, with a sibling, or simply a friend. And even if you live on a mountaintop all by yourself and you never see another person, you're still having a relationship with yourself. So you are always in relationship with someone. Those relationships are your opportunity to experience emotion. Emotion is what it is that turns off and on the patterns of DNA within your body that allow you to gracefully transition through these experiences, times of tremendous change in very compressed time frames. That is why so many people now are saying, that time, they sense that time is speeding up. Well, you measure time, your cells measure time by the number of pulses per second that our planet emanates. Well, those number of pulses have gone from 7.8 to at least 8.6 cycles per second. So yes, I would expect that you will sense that time speeding up, because it is. As the days grow shorter, Earth pulsates faster. Many people now are saying that they are experiencing very intense emotions through even more intense relationships. And if that's true, I would not be surprised if it is true because of this. As we get closer and closer to this time that the ancients called the shift of the ages, we are asking ourselves with a greater and greater sense of urgency to find balance, to reconcile the patterns of our lives so that they may serve us and not hinder us in the evolutionary path along this road to the shift. Many people are saying now that they are sensing a tremendous sense of anxiety and urgency within their bodies. They are sensing on some level, they are feeling this process as it unfolds within our lives. Well, you know, as I talk to people in many parts of the world, I have the opportunity. Then people say to me, I understand what you're saying here. What good does it do if I change and no one else around me changes? What good does it do if I remember compassion in my life, if I become compassion, if I remember no hate in a world that has learned to hate in the past, or if I remember no fear in a world that has learned to fear in the past? Well, to help understand what good that does, I have a short video clip that I'd like to show you. In the science of chaos theory, there is a mathematical equation that defines the point where order and chaos merge. It's a membrane where order and chaos come together. And until recently, it was a nebulous theoretical point. And with the advent of high-speed computers, now we're able to plug the mathematical formula into these computers and create an image, a picture of what this image actually looks like. We call the resulting image the Mandelbrot set. Your life is holographic in nature. I know that you know that, and I know you've heard that many times. I'd like to take a few moments and pausing in this video to explore precisely what that means to you, your life, and your relationships, your emotions, and your feelings. Every emotion, each feeling, each response that you choose to any given situation affects every other person on this earth to some degree. That's the beauty of the holographic model. That's the power in compassion. Together, let's explore the nature of this relationship through an image that researchers are calling the Mandelbrot set. What you're seeing on your screen right here, this is an image of a mathematical point that is called the Mandelbrot set. It is a point in chaos theory where order and chaos merge. And where they come together, that point may be defined mathematically. As we feed the mathematics into computers, this is the graphic equivalent of that boundary between order and chaos, the Mandelbrot set. Now, the reason I use this image to describe this concept is because this is a very good example of a hologram. One definition of a hologram may go something like this. In a hologram, the whole pattern is whole and complete unto itself, and if you were to take any little portion of this whole out and examine it closely, you will see the entire pattern repeating itself again and again and again. This is the way the Mandelbrot set works. This entire image is called the Mandelbrot set. And as you'll see around the periphery of the Mandelbrot set, you'll see many, many other little patterns. These are all little Mandelbrots. Now, we're going to use the power of our computer to take us into this image. We will zoom into the image, and you'll see that as we zoom into this image, the pattern repeats itself again and again and again. And this is where the beauty of the holographic model becomes apparent. Because it goes like this. Anywhere in this pattern, if we were to change one little aspect on any one of these little holograms, on any one of these little Mandelbrots, that change would be reflected throughout the entire system. Every place where you saw this pattern would reflect that change, no matter where in the system we place the change. Our consciousness works that way. To the degree that you allow yourself to remember the gift of compassion, to remember the option of no hate and no fear in a world that has learned to hate and fear, to the degree that you allow that in your little piece of our universe To some degree, that change is reflected throughout the entire pattern of our universe because we are holographic in nature. Well, let's explore this relationship together as through our computer we allow the computer to take us deeply into this model. There's our Mandelbrot set, and you can see that we are zooming into a complete portion, very specific portion of this set, and notice all along the periphery, all along the edges of the pattern, you see many, many, many Mandelbrot sets. As you listen to the music from this, it's almost a meditation as we move into this powerful pattern, the model that represents our consciousness. You see all the little Mandelbrot sets lining up side by side. Any change in any one of those sets would be reflected throughout the entire pattern, throughout the whole. There's something very interesting that will happen as we move farther and farther, deeper and deeper into the innermost regions of this pattern. And we see the pattern repeat itself over and over again. We're moving to an end point. And as we reach this end point, what you'll see is that we end up with precisely the same pattern that we began with. Your relationships work in this manner. Your life works in this manner. The patterns are with you no matter where you go, no matter how far deeply into your life you move, or how far you attempt to remove yourself from the patterns of life. You are holographic in nature. No matter where you move to, what part of the world, what part of the country, no matter how many relationships you move into or out of, how many friendships you choose to initiate or complete, the patterns of your life remain the same because they are holographic in nature. And now you see, as we approach the end of the lifetime of this mathematical equation, this mathematical model, what we are completing with is precisely the same thing that we began with, the Mandelbrot set. No matter how deeply into this pattern we would move, if we were to begin once again now to look deeply into this pattern, we would see precisely the same thing happening again. We would see precisely these little Mandelbrot sets, one after another, again and again, reflecting in each of them, respectively, the pattern of the whole. There's a story that was recorded in the journals of the Spaniards when they came to this country to explore the New World, as they were exploring new paths of possibilities of how to get to this world, of a meeting with an indigenous tribe in the southern tip of Africa, with a tribal shaman who had never seen white men before, who had never seen the ships and the canvas sails before. And when the shaman, in his language, communicated to them the question, where did you come from? And as the Spaniards pointed to their ships out on the sea, the tribal shaman looked at them and he said, "What ship?" Because even though his eyes were looking at the patterns of large wooden planks and the large canvas sails, they were so foreign to his expression of life, they were so foreign to his framework of reference, that he could not recognize those patterns. And he was fascinated by this. And the shaman began to work with this, and he said, you know, if I play with this pattern, if I squint my eyes a specific way, I think I'm beginning to see something. And although that's interesting, the really interesting thing is this: it wasn't long before his entire tribe was able to see those ships, even though they were not on the shore with him. Why? Why did they learn to see differently, even though they weren't on the shore having the same experience that he had? The answer to that is what we call collective resonance. And it is through collective resonance that you and I have the opportunity, through compassion. It doesn't take many people in compassion to allow a change in the whole. That's the gift of the hologram. That is the gift of your life and the expression of your life in this time in history, just a few short years before the time that the ancients called the shift of the ages. Through the Mandelbrot experience, through the holographic nature of our experience, every time you remember that to hate is an option and that you have a higher option, that to fear is an option and that you may choose a higher option, each time you remember that, to some degree, you become the living bridge in the holographic nature of our awareness, anchoring that option, anchoring that wisdom for all who have the courage to follow you. That's your gift. That's your opportunity. It's through our relationships that we have the opportunity to demonstrate to one another and to ourselves the mastery of the emotions and the mastery of what our lives have come to be. It is through the science of compassion and the temples of our relationships that you and I are being gifted the opportunity to tune our bodies to the changes that the earth is asking us to accommodate within our lives. So we've just spent the last couple of hours going over many of the parameters of what that tuning is all about and what's involved in that tuning. Some of the concepts may sound a little technical, some may sound a little nebulous, and because of that, what I'd like to do now for the next few minutes is to demonstrate to you through a real-life story precisely how these temples may come into your lives, sometimes when you least expect it, and what the temples mean to you as they're unfolding in your life. I know my life the best, and from that I will share a single story with you, a story that's helped many people. It's provided some concreteness to what sometimes are otherwise very nebulous concepts. So I'll begin this story. 1993, I had 3 people came into my life, all within just a few short weeks of one another in 1993, in 3 very different and also related relationships. One of those people was a business partner that contacted me and came in to my life through a business relationship. One was it was a friend who was a friend and also someone who came to live on my property with me in exchange for work that would be done on the property. And one was a romantic relationship, all of them beginning at approximately the same time. Well, there was something interesting that happened in these relationships. In that it wasn't long after beginning each of them that each of those people in the relationships began to exhibit characteristics that just made me crazy. Just drove me right up the wall in the past of those relationships. And I discounted those feelings. And this is important when I say this. I discounted the feelings. So what happened was I would come home from a business trip, from a workshop or a lecture, and things would be happening at home, things that were just making me crazy at the time. And I'd say, you know, I'm just tired, or it's just me, and I'm going to be gone again in a few days. So I would kind of discount those experiences, and I would go on my next trip. And I'd come home, and the same thing would be happening again and again and again. Well, each time I come home from a trip, there's a routine that I follow. I come in through the Albuquerque airport, I go to the ATM, get some money out, take my car out of parking, pick up any pets from the vet, go to the grocery store, and go home. And I was coming back from a particular trip in Seattle, not long after these relationships had begun in my life. And my routine didn't get very far. I came in on the plane, I went to the ATM to get the money out, and the ATM told me that there was no money available to me. This was on a Sunday afternoon, late on a Sunday afternoon. And I knew that there was a mistake because I had just put a fairly large sum of money into that account from a loan, a construction loan, as I was renovating the property, the meditation center in northern New Mexico, where I had recently moved. So I knew that there was a mistake. There was nothing that could be done on a Sunday afternoon with the ATM people. So Monday morning I got up and I called the bank, and much to my surprise, they said, "Mr. Braden, there is no mistake. All those funds were withdrawn, and that account now is 71 checks overdrawn, and we are assessing you a fee for each of those checks that's overdrawn." And I said, "Wow, something's happened here." And I went in and worked with the bank, and found out that someone I had trusted, trusted tremendously, had taken the liberty with that account, had essentially drawn all the money out of that account, taken the name off of the account, and the bank had allowed that whole process to happen. Well, when I go home from a trip and I have some time to spend at home, there's an old dirt road, just down from my home, and I love to walk on this road because there's no traffic and there's nothing to do but walk and think. And I began walking on this road to try to understand what had just happened to me. I mean, something big. When something big like that happens in your life, you know that there's something going on. Each of these three people in these three relationships were really becoming a challenge to deal with. And now I had absolutely no money in my account. I couldn't get my car out of the Albuquerque parking lot. I couldn't pull my pets out of the vet. I couldn't go to the grocery store. The workmen were already on my property, renovating the property. And I went home to them and I said, you might as well leave. I have no money to pull my animals out of the vet. I certainly cannot pay you. And all these things happened all in the same weekend. Well, as I began walking down this road, I was conditioned, as many of you were, that when something is in your face, when someone is showing you something that you do not like, that they're showing you you. They're a mirror of something about you that you don't like. So I said to myself, if these people are mirroring something to me, what is it they're showing me about myself? And to know that, I had to be very clear about what was being demonstrated in each of the relationships. And as I walked along this about it, became very clear to me that there were issues of trust, issues of honesty, issues of integrity. All three of those issues were involved in my relationships with these other people. In the business relationship, I would uphold my end of the business. I would do the presentations as I was contracted to do them. And for a number of reasons, explanations that were given to me at the time, I could not get paid. They were not paying me to do in a timely fashion to do these events. And I was not able to meet my commitments, my mortgage payments and commitments that I had to other people. So all of these relationships, the gentleman that was living on my property chose in his lifestyle to demonstrate behavior patterns that I was not able to accept on my property at that time. I said, this is not what this property is all about. All three of those people were showing me issues that I believe they were mirroring issues to me of myself. So I'm walking down this road and I'm thinking, if they're showing me these issues of myself, then what are they saying? Are they saying to me that I am not trustworthy, or that I have issues of integrity, or that my honesty is in question? And immediately I knew that the answer was no, because that's precisely what this work is all about. It's based in trust and integrity and honesty. And immediately this thing welled up inside of me and it said, no, Greg, you're not being shown, they are not mirroring to you the things that you are in this moment. Those people in their own way were mirroring to me that which I judged. They were mirroring to me patterns that I had a tremendous charge on. And it's true, I had at that time a tremendous charge on trust, issues of trust and integrity and honesty. It's a very subtle yet powerful pattern. Now think about what they were showing me. By my charge, by my dislike of those characteristics, I had skillfully drawn to my life three people because of that charge that mirrored right back to me that subtle pattern. And it is a very subtle pattern. If you have someone in your life right now that you love on one hand, and on the other hand, they exhibit characteristics and patterns that are hard for you to live with, to deal with, that just sometimes make you crazy. There is a very good possibility, as you look at those patterns, if you can honestly say, they're not mirroring to me what I am, there's a very good possibility that you can say, they're mirroring to me that which I judge. It's a powerful, powerful lesson. Well, let me continue with this story because it's pretty interesting the way that the whole thing unfolded. Later that day, I took a trip out to the Taos Pueblo, not far from where I live, and I met with a friend of mine who is an artist that lives on the Pueblo. And I hadn't seen him for a while, and I said, hi, how are you doing? And he said, I'm fine, what's going on with you? And I shared with him this story of what had just happened to me. And he said, well, let me share a story with you. He said, 100 years ago in northern New Mexico, our plains were full of herds of wild buffalo. And my great-grandfather, in his initiation rite into adulthood, was asked to kill a buffalo to demonstrate his skills of hunting, and he did. He said his great-grandfather went out and he killed his first buffalo, and he kept the head of that buffalo, and it was a prized possession. It was a treasure, a tangible link with his past. And this gentleman had kept it for all of these years. Well, he was an artist and a craftsman, a jeweler. And there was another jeweler from Taos who had come to the Pueblo and had seen this buffalo head and said, I'd like to use this buffalo head in a display in my jewelry shop. How would you feel about that? And he said, that's fine. So he allowed his prized possession, something that he held dear to him, to go with someone else and be used in her display. And he didn't hear from her for a couple of weeks. And it wasn't long after that he went into the house to see what was happening with this woman in her shop. Her gallery, the doors were locked, the windows were soaped up, and it was closed down, and she had left town and taken this prized possession, his great-grandfather's buffalo head, with her, and he knew he would never see it again. And it hurt him deeply. And I said, what did you do? What did you do about that? And he said, you know, I did nothing, because she will always live with what she's done. And I left the Taos Pueblo that day, and I thought about what he said to me. The person that had taken the money out of my account, I had some legal options. Attorneys said I had a pretty good case. If I chose to pursue that case, it would probably take a long time, it would cost a lot of money, and it was not a civil case, it was a criminal case. It would have to be tried as a criminal case. And if convicted, that person would probably spend some time incarcerated. And although I was very angry and very hurt at what had happened, I didn't want that to happen to that person. I didn't feel that was justified. And I called this person on the phone and I said, you know, I have some options. I'm considering legally pursuing this case, and I want you to know that. I just want you to know that I'm thinking about this for a couple of days, and I did. I reached a conclusion that surprised many people around me, and I thought about my friend on the Taos Pueblo. Because my choice was to do nothing. I did not want to prolong the relationship. I didn't want to spend the time and the money pursuing this case. And I felt like it was a very powerful lesson for me to let it go, and I did. And immediately after I let that go, and there was a whole process that I went through to get to that point, through the Essene sciences of compassion. Excuse me. What happened was that every relationship that was being held close to me through the charge of those things that I judged, every relationship that was being held by the charge of honesty and integrity and trust, every one of those relationships fell away at the same time because of the holographic nature of what I had released in the forgiveness of this person. Now the beauty of this, there's a lot more to this story. The lessons that I learned, probably the most powerful lesson was a lesson of discernment. Prior to that time, trust for me had been binary. Trust was something that I either did or I didn't. You either trusted someone or you do not trust someone. I, up until that time, had a tendency to entrust people with a greater level of trust than they themselves were willing to allow, a greater trust than they found themselves worthy of. The discernment of trust was a powerful lesson for me, and the opportunity for me to trust within my own feelings. Now, there's something really interesting that happened with each of those three people that came into my life. Each of those three people, I had a feeling about them, and I discounted the feeling. I ignored the feeling as I felt it. So, for example, the business relationship, and this is just so amazing. The businessman, within the first 10 minutes of our meeting at the home of an acquaintance in Northern California, I asked him a question I asked very few people. Out of the blue, I just said, when's your birthday? And he said, oh, my birthday is June 28th, 1954. And I said, well, that's exactly when my birthday is. The same month, the same day, and the same year. We're both Cancerians. I thought, what a beautiful basis for a business relationship, the feeling world of a Cancerian. And he looked at me in that moment, and he said something to me, and I discounted it. He looked at me in that moment, and he said, you know, I'm your evil twin. And I heard it, and I discounted it through my logic. What I said was, oh, Greg, get off of it. You know, that's silly for you to think that it wouldn't be. He was just kidding when he said that. He looked at me when he said that. I had a feeling, and I discounted it. I had a similar feeling with a romantic relationship. I had a similar feeling with a friend who was coming to live on my property, and I discounted all of those. So along with the lesson of discernment of trust, I also had a very powerful lesson of trusting myself and my personal feelings in dealings and relationships with other people. And I know that you do the same. And the reason I share this story with you is because it is so important to trust those feelings and to know what those feelings are saying to you. It was very interesting following this whole series of events. The workmen who were on my property that I couldn't pay because there was no money, they said to me, you know, we really love being here in northern New Mexico this time of year in the summer. It's beautiful. Would you consider an exchange of some kind, a trade for the work we're doing on your property? And I said, well, you bet. What would I possibly have that you would be interested in? And they said, the contractor, the head workman, said to me that at that time he and his girlfriend had always wanted to go to Egypt, and they'd always wanted to go to Peru, and would I be willing to take them in exchange for the work that was being done on the property? And I said, you bet. And we worked out a system. The work got done, no money was exchanged, and the next year they went with me to Peru. It's interesting how something like that works. The friendship, the gentleman that was living on my property, it wasn't long before it made no sense for him to live with me anymore at all as the romantic relationship. They disintegrated very quickly without me really doing anything as this process was unfolding within our experience. So the two primary lessons that came from that experience, discernment of trust and trusting the feelings that come from within. Now, the business relationship, this was a gentleman who was booking my events for me. And as I left that relationship, I left all of the events. There were no events for me to do from that point forward. No seminars, no lectures, no tours. And I had nothing to go to. And it happened on a weekend. Well, it wasn't 2 days later, Tuesday of the following week, I had a phone call. And I had a phone call from a woman that lives in the Northeast. A beautiful woman lives there. And she said, I heard about you through some friends. I would like to book your events and to bring you into this part of the country. Would you be willing to work with me in that respect? And the first thing I asked her, the first thing out of my mouth, I said, I'd be willing to consider it. When is your birthday? And she said to me, my birthday is June 28th, 1954. The exact identical birthday of myself and the gentleman who I just had a horrible time with in this business relationship. And I came very close to hanging up the phone and walking away from that relationship. And something within me said no. I said, you know, just because I had this experience one time with this person, I didn't feel that that warranted negating every subsequent relationship that looked like it was going to be the same. And I shared the story with her. I shared the story of the gentleman who had the same birthday as both of us, who would book the events for me and was not paying me in a timely fashion. And she laughed and she said, are you willing to give this friendship, this relationship a chance? And I said, sure, you bet, because it felt like the thing to do. And what I'll say to you now is that in trusting my feelings in that moment, what I had the opportunity to do and what I have now, if I had not trusted my feelings, I would have lost one of my most dear friends and one of my best business partners that I've ever had. And the reason I share this portion of the story with you is because I'm finding this happening to many people throughout the country. There's a pattern. It's a pattern that's unfolding for all of us. As we are barreling down this road toward the time the ancients called the shift of the ages, and we skillfully draw the experiences to us that allow us relationships, and in those relationships, the gift of emotion and what we do with those emotions, here's what's happening. Here's what we're seeing happening. Is that over and over again, we are being offered the same opportunities, the same situations, and the same circumstances, and they're having different outcomes. The outcomes are 180 degrees shifted. They are polarity outcomes. They are very different from the outcomes of the original experience. I'm seeing this happen to many people, and as we consciously recognize these experiences, and we're able to consciously move in with discernment and say, ah, I recognize this pattern and I see exactly what it is that's happening. Through the Essene traditions, through the Essene sciences, we are offered the 7 mysteries of personal relationship. And I've just shared with you the first 2. The first 2 mysteries, the mirror, the Essene mirror of the mystery of judgment. The things that I judged were being mirrored back to me by the people who were demonstrating to me those things that I judged, the 3 people that came into my life. The first mirror, the mirror of the things that we are in a moment. As someone mirrors back to us that which we are in the moment, if we have the wisdom to recognize that mirror, we have the wisdom to see a powerful portion of ourselves being unveiled as we are seeking to find those pieces of ourselves and move toward the wholeness that gracefully carries us through this time in our lives. So I offer you these examples as concrete examples of how these relationships come about. No one flashes a big neon sign and says, here comes the mystery neon sign and says, here comes the mystery of the first mirror of judgment, or the Essene mystery of the mirror of that which you are in the moment. It doesn't happen that way. These mysteries sneak up on you, usually when you will least expect it. What I've discovered for many people is that they are experiencing what for them are the worst fears, the worst times they could ever imagine happen in their lives. And everyone's worst fear is different. For some people, a worst fear may be the loss of a loved one, or those that they hold most dear, because their worst fear is the fear of being alone. While the person next to them has no problem being alone, for them, their worst fear may be the loss of physical vitality and health within their bodies, or the loss of finances, or the ability to generate those finances. Everyone's worst fear is different. And as I work with people, as I have over the years, and as I work with clients in years past, what I have seen personally is also reflected through the Essene texts. And it simply goes like this. Whatever it is that's happening in your life in this moment, whatever that is, when you reach a crisis in your life, it's a time that the ancients called the dark night of the soul. In the dark night of the soul, you will be faced with what for you appear to be the greatest challenges ever of your life. And what the Essene texts say is this, is that it is impossible for you to create for yourself, to draw into your life the circumstances and the situations that give you, that provide you the dark night of the soul, until you have amassed to yourself all the tools that will carry you gracefully through that experience. It's impossible. It's impossible for you to create those experiences because it is in the amassing of the tools. As you go through the relationships, as you go through the experiences, you develop the arsenal and the array of tools within you. It's not until you have assimilated those tools, that assimilation is the trigger for creation to bring into you the opportunity to demonstrate your mastery of your worst fears. And that's the way it works. You will go through many, many relationships. You'll go through many, many experiences. Sometimes they take years. Sometimes they take months. And suddenly you will be faced with what for you is the most tremendous challenge of your life. When that happens, what I will say to you is congratulations. In the amassing of the tools, that experience is not possible until you know that you have everything you need to gracefully move through that time in your life. You know this. Your mother probably said this to you when you were young. She probably said, you will never have more on your plate than you're able to deal with. God never gives you more than you are able to deal with. And I believe that's precisely where these funny old sayings that our parents and their parents offered them. It was through that wisdom of the Essene traditions. When we have the opportunity to demonstrate, many people say they feel like they're being tested. They may be perceived as tests, and just as easily, the opportunities may be perceived simply as that, as opportunities to demonstrate the mastery of emotion and the mastery of feeling, the mastery of that which you have become. As we go through the 3-day workshops, there's several things that I offer, several single lines, I believe, of knowledge that help to anchor concepts, help people remember the things that we have talked about. We've covered a tremendous amount of very technical, in some cases, very esoteric, in some cases, very right-brained, in some cases, information. And the reality is that we do not have to know any of these things. In the complexity of our being, we are extremely complex beings. In the complexity of our being lies the simplicity that all we have to do is be. If you're familiar with a Macintosh computer, for example, you know that when you place a little arrow on an image and you simply push a button and all these things happen on that computer, for you to have that degree of simplicity, some very complex things have happened behind the scenes. Well, you and I work in a very similar fashion. In the complexity of who and what we've come to be lies the simplicity that all we have to do is be. All we have to do is have the experience. Well, it is through that simplicity that I am able to say to you the following things. As you live your life, day in and day out, what I can say to you is this, that you have the opportunity to observe all life as it unfolds around you, and you will primarily experience those things that you identify most with. You will see everything happening in the world as it unfolds, as we barrel down this road toward the shift of the ages. What do you identify with? Do you identify with the joy and the light and the goodness and the beauty of what this world is all about? Or are you focused on the things that you do not like? Is that what your identity, where your identity lies? Those are the things that you're being asked to determine in your life. I can say to you this, that as you learn and as you remember the truth of what your world and what your life is all about, it is important in the learning to not be caught in the box of what you have learned in the past, to not be limited by what you have been taught. Take the knowledge that you have been taught and allow it to become a pivotal point to move beyond that which you've been taught, to move into the world of that which is not yet experienced and not yet known. Allow that in your life. I can say to you this, I can say that because and through the laws of creation, the laws of electrical and magnetic interactions, the laws of attraction between opposites, I can say this, that which you most choose to have in your life, the love and the nurturing and the compassion, the companionship and the honesty and the integrity, that which you most choose to have in your life, it's not enough to want them. If you want them, you simply will allow yourself to want and want and want. That which you most choose to have in your life, you must first become. You must become that which you choose to have in your life. You must become the peace that you choose to have in your world. You must become the compassion that you choose to have in your world. You must become the forgiveness that you so desire for your loved ones and your families. And in that becoming, you then are the living bridge to those that you hold most dear, as you live and demonstrate the truth of what your life has become. You must become the things that you most choose to have in your life. The opportunity and the mechanism that allows all of us to become those things are the relationships that we have with one another and the opportunity to emote and feel in our lives. So I invite you to explore emotion, to explore feeling, and to explore relationships consciously, with intent. Be aware of why you are drawn to the patterns that you're drawn to. Be aware of why you are drawn into the relationships that you are drawn into. And that awareness is available to you through the Essene mysteries of relationship, the Essene mirrors of self. So I have here for you now a slide summarizing the first 4 of those 7 mysteries. And as you're able to see these mysteries, the mysteries of the mirror of what you are in the moment, the mysteries of the mirror of that which you judge, the mysteries of the portions of yourselves that you have lost or had given away or taken away in your life, the mysteries of your greatest fear, your most forgotten love. These mysteries are available to you through the open literature, through those ancient texts, certainly through the 0 Point workshops. I invite you to explore those mysteries in your own lives and embrace the opportunity to live your life as an initiate of the highest order. Truly, we are living the collective initiation. Truly, we are all given the opportunity to demonstrate to ourselves what this time of initiation means as we move toward the awakening to 0 Point, the collective initiation. I'll share with you a story. Researchers recently related in one of the Nature magazines. This is a very beautiful and very touching story, the story of geese. I know some of you probably have read or heard of this story. Researchers have determined that geese, as they fly together, are very closely tuned to one another as they fly in their flock, for example. That the geese, by flying together in a formation, that they add over 71% greater distance in moving together toward a common goal than if each of those geese were to move separately and independently on their own. We probably have something that we can learn from that. The researchers determined that the geese, as the lead goose, as as the head goose would move forward in his flock, and as he would become tired of his own volition, of his own choice, he would drop and fall behind and allow someone else to take the lead and lead the whole toward their greater goal. And perhaps for me, the most beautiful portion of this story is that researchers determined through their experience and through their observation that any time within a flock that any one goose is injured from a hunter's bullet or from illness and chooses to fall out of the formation, always, 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 that goose is always accompanied by at least 2 others who will follow him to the ground and will stay with him until he either recovers from his injuries or dies. And if he recovers from the injuries, together the 3 will follow from one flock to another and another until they reach their original flock. And if he dies, then the one that is left behind will be left, and the other 2 will catch up with that original flock. The beauty of that story and the metaphor for me is I believe we are essentially living as a flock moving toward a common goal. My choice is that no one gets left behind. Everyone learns at a different level. Everyone understands and accelerates at a different pace, and we're all moving toward the same place. We're all part of this process. So I also invite you, as you live this time of initiation, as you experience through the highest orders of mastery within the emotional body that has become your being, that you become that compassion, you become that patience, you become the forgiveness for those that you see around you who may not have achieved that place exactly at the same time in exactly the same manner that you would expect to see that. It doesn't mean that they should be left behind. It is our opportunity, it's your opportunity to demonstrate your compassion, your forgiveness, your ability to allow yourself to become the living bridge for those that you love the most and hold most dear. If we can learn anything from those geese at all, what we can learn is that no one need be left behind, and no one need have this experience alone, that we all are part of one another and part of the experience as we are moving toward this path that we call the shift of the ages. In the words of the ancient and forgotten peoples of this world, in their traditions, there's a word for the force that binds all in its creation. It is simply the word spirit. And I'll share with you now the Hopi prayer of compassion, a prayer to the spirit, the force that underlies all of creation. In that tradition, the word for spirit is Wakan Tanka. And this is the prayer to Wakan Tanka. Walk on Tonkai, on Shimai Lai, which are Shon Koayo. Hey Anna, hey Anne, oe. Hey Anna, hey Anne, oe. Walk on Tonka, on Shimai Lai. Walk on Tonkai, on Shimai Lai, which are Shon Koayo. Hey Anna, hey Anne, oe. Hey Anna, hey Anne, oe. Walk on Tonka, on Shimai Lai. Spirit of compassion, show us the way. Show us the way. Show us the way.